Steve McCloud is the historian preserving the memory of Fox Company 223 Marines and author of Black Dragon, The Experience of a Marine Rifle Company in the Central Pacific, not just as a unit, but as the men who lived, fought, and carried it home. This conversation is bigger than any of us, and their stories deserve to be heard. This is Tales from the Corps. Steve, what struck you the deepest about Fox Company? Not the unit, but the men.
Well, no, that's a pretty good question. I went in some 30 years. In fact, it was 30 years ago, as a bonehead civilian, going to go talk to some combat vets, combat Marines on Iwo Jima, right? And so I've got my questions, and found that just really. Later on, I realized I was just a boot, asking dumb questions, and what still sticks with me was the, shall I say, grace with which and patience with which they accepted me and sort of brought me up, if you might say. And I guarantee you some of them did the same during the war. But that a lot of those preconceptions and maybe the John Wayneisms and that kind of stuff just weren't reality, especially for Iwo Jima. And then eventually, and I was doing corporate training at the time, and I realized, hang on a second, we're not discovering anything new. These guys already know this stuff. They've already lived it. They just they're not articulators of it, for the training and leadership stuff. All those things surprise me. And so, you go in, I'm thinking in terms of what little I know that I've read in books and X's and O's. And if you pay attention, you find out it's very different in reality. And it's about the people and about the team itself and that organism that we call Fox Company. Et cetera. And that's a whole different entity in this different discussion. So those things came as a big surprise to me.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it just flashed me back to a segment with Tim Gray. You're talking about how it kind of surprised you these guys to open up and tell stories. And he made a comment that it kind of made me think about something, how, so, and I know you've ran into this because you talked about it in Fredericksburg last February when we were there for the Iwo Jima conference memorial anniversary. And it's how a lot of combat vets, they don't even tell these stories to their family, but someone like you, someone like Tim, who comes with the questions, you're able to get these stories. Was that something that, you kind of already alluded to, it surprised you, but did it, what are your thoughts even on that? Like for you to be, cause once you learned that you were able to get the stories that their families didn't.
In the very first reunion that I was at in North Charleston. And I remember very clearly in that, I think the first day, sitting in the hospitality room, and a fellow named Don Swindle sitting on my right, going at it. And on my left, I remember a little fellow named Eddie Davis going at it. And I didn't know particularly, and I found out, you better be light on your feet and know what they're talking about. Because when you're going to be on the beach, and then you're going to be on the cliffs on Saipan, and then you're going to be, it's like that at the road there on Tinian. And then, like, whoa, you gotta be able to hang with them. Or at least pretend you know what they're talking about and look it up later,
Right.
But
that's how we do these podcasts.
Yeah. And I don't know if I was recording that conversation. Fortunately, from the start, I always carried a little micro cassette recorder with me. And I would have that because I was not really doing interviews. I started out asking questions, just getting to know the guys and stuff. But later it became recording team conversations as they happened and just having those. But I always had that with me. But I'm sitting at the table and they're going to town. And then Eddie Davis, who had been the company runner, the field music, at one point he goes, "I got to go to the head." And he gets up and he leaves the table. And I look on the other side of him is his wife, Barb, looking across at me like, I've been married to him 30 years. I've never heard any of that before. I didn't know what to say to that, but it's just reality. A lot of it has to do with, there's a lot of layers to it about, um, and if that's a topic we will talk about, let's take a minute or two with that.
Sure.
These guys during World War II, it's over 16 million Americans alive. 16 million out of 160 million in the 1940 census. So 1 out of 10 people alive, whether you're a toddler or great grandfather, 1 out of 10 of you served in uniform.
Yeah.
And the great majority, thankfully, came home, but everybody else served. They don't need to hear from me. I'm going to get to work like they are. And so when Gunny Douglas said, that I had a friend for 30 years and he never knew I was on Iwo Jima, we never talked about it. Until it came up one day, and I was at his house. We went to family lunches with him and dinners after church and everything else. And something about Iwo was said, and then he said, I was on Iwo Jima. And the guy said, well, I didn't know that. And he said, we just didn't talk about it. And it wasn't, a lot of it was, that's over with. And by golly, I don't want to mess with that ever again. Don't want to hear it. And there was a lot of that. There's a lot of everybody else did it. They don't need to hear from me. And there's a lot of, Mom, you don't really want to know, don't ask.
Yeah.
Or the wife, they didn't want to know. And if the kids didn't know what to ask, nobody does, right? You go up to a combat veteran, what do you say? And folks just didn't know this. So there are a lot of layers to it. But when you get to the point of, can you establish a shared understanding? Or, when they get back together, they already have that implicit understanding. They don't need to lay all the groundwork and fight all the fights, and they can just get in and talk.
Yeah.
And if you can achieve some of that, some insight. I remember being at one of the division reunions, 4th Marine Division reunions, and the banquet, they would split everybody up and assign you seats at various tables with folks you didn't know, which was a great thing. So I sat there and kept my mouth shut for a while until this fellow on my left said something about being in the JASCO. I said, were you naval gunfire or air ground liaison? You know about JASCOs? Sure. No, we were air ground. I said, did you carry a TCX, TBX on the Jeep, or did you guys relay with the SCR-3? Boom, off we went, Or a corpsman. There was a corpsman in Hawaii in September. And some guys standing around, young fellows who really wanted to think of something to say, to go talk to him. I said, come on. And I went up and I said, blah, blah, blah. He was I said, you were a line corpsman. He goes, that's right. And we talked about it. I said, now, who was your battalion surgeon? My battalion surgeon. Well, and he tapped me and off he went. And so one of the things that always gets asked of me when we're doing our leadership programs, a colleague, co-instructor will say, listen, if all of you have family members who served whenever they served, and they generally don't talk about it. Talk to Steve if you want to get any insights. Well, what insights could I give them? Except don't ask them about themselves. Ask them about their leaders or their teammates. And then have pen and paper ready to go. And you're off. They don't want to talk about themselves, but they will talk about the folks they love or hated.
Yeah, that's don't ask them, right? I don't know if we need to say this, but yeah, like don't ask them the stupid,
oh, how many people did you kill during the war?
Yeah.
I saw this happen on the Band of Brothers tour one time, and I just wanted to puke. It was unbelievable, but yeah.
I tell people the best, like people will reach out sometimes and ask questions. Like if we touched on mental health or sobriety, or I actually had a guy text me the other night about wanting to quit. I stayed up talking with him. Well, the story for another time, but one of the questions someone asked me was like, how do you ever deal with that question if you ever killed anybody? And for me, I thought about it for a while, and for me, it's no matter what the answer to that question is, it'll forever change your opinion of that person.
Yeah.
And so something that powerful, that personal, sometimes those things just don't need to be asked. And if they are asked, they don't need to be answered. But you pointed out something else, like really, really huge that kind of hit me. And this is why these conversations are so important, is because it gets me thinking about things. And you're talking about how guys could know each other, have served on the same island, the same battlefield, been on the same ship. In some cases, the same battalion, right? You got 1,000 people in the battalion. I didn't know all the guys in Kilo, India, weapons. And back then, we didn't have all the damn hats and grunt style t-shirts and things. Because when you were talking about these guys were like, oh, you were on Iwo Jima, it made me think about, I was wearing of course, a Ton Tavern Marine Corps shirt, and some guy notices that he comes up and talks with me. We were in the same fight together, Operation Steel Curtain, like, and Husayba in Iraq. Like, we were in combat together, and yeah, a lot of those conversations, you got me thinking about how, like, yeah, that stuff didn't come up because if they didn't have anything or nobody said anything, or and that today we have like everybody has the tattoos,
right.
We have all the dead giveaways,
signs, carrying the signs around.
Yeah. We have all the dead giveaways that we served, in a theater or served in period. But yeah, back then, like you said, they came home. They didn't really want to talk about it, and there was no visible, recognition of somebody else that they could talk to.
Yes, and in my own observation, put it that way, even within, let's just say the 4th Marine Division, I'm going to assert that the first ones who got together were probably the motor transport and artillery guys and et cetera. And I think that's accurate. Your guys up there with the pointy weapons took a little longer to get back together. That's my read on it. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think I am. And it's not because one was better than the other or anything else. But there were some things that were buried and buried deep, and they didn't talk about it literally for 40 years until somebody reached out to them and said, hey, we're getting together, and they just decided it was time. And, these guys from Fox Company knew, for example, that division reunions started happening in the 40s. They didn't want anything to do with it. But then all of a sudden they decided, you know what? Irby decided, I want to see Ralph. Where's Ralph? And they started going to libraries back in those days and getting phone books and looking up people and trying to find phone numbers, which was a lot of work. And they did a lot of work to find each other. And Irby Hip, Corporal Irby Hip, who was a machine gun section leader, lived in South Carolina. His wife, Liddy, was just as good as it gets. I mean, she was just phenomenal. But she told me, the first year when they got together, they didn't talk about the war. They just got together. That's what they wanted.
Yeah.
And I think therein lay a lesson that has value in many ways, including, you mentioned a fellow who felt like he wanted to quit. And I was at a watering hole a few years back, a favorite of mine, and late afternoon, probably 4 o'clock, something like that, and talking to this fellow on my left, and I don't know what was said, something about going to the head, or it's good to go, or whatever it was, something that tipped him off, and off we went. And the more beers we had, the more came out. And he viewed himself as a murderer because he'd been a sentry, and a truck came through. It was through the barriers, and he'd fired warning shots, and then finally they killed this fellow. And later they find out he was just going to pick up his daughter. And, well, what are you going to do if you're me? I said, I'm a nobody, but I'm going to tell you something. I've been around combat veterans for half my life, and you need to find your buddies, because you don't carry that around with you, because that is an ugly job with terrible outcomes, and that's just the way it is. But you don't carry that alone. Now that I can tell you. So these guys got together to be together, and that was the value of it. And first and foremost, as a Marine, the most important people in the world are your fellow Marines when you're out in the battlefield. And then you come home and they're not there.
Yeah.
What's going to fill that void? There's nothing that can.
Nothing does, man.
No. And so you have got to absolutely get back together and just so there's a level of understanding, shared understanding, doesn't even need to be talked about. You know that when you're with your best buddy and you just go sit in the dirt for a while, that's good to go. They don't need to say a word.
We had, and you said 40 years. I was going to ask how long till a lot of the grunts got back together. We had our first, it was about 20 years after the fact. And to just echo exactly what you're saying. When we got together, I don't really remember if we did talk about things that happened over there. It was more like the humorous, funny things.
Right, right.
We did take, because it was a reunion done through Simplifying America's Fun, and we did have, moments where we remembered the guys that we lost. We took time for that. Uh, but like just being there together,
Hmm.
just waking up and going and getting something to eat,
Mhm.
and just seeing all the guys.
Hmm.
And yeah, man, I mean, yeah, you nailed it. Like there is this part of your soul that feels restored, filling the void you're just speaking about. And we tell people who listen, find your guys,
Find your guys. Yeah.
get together, even inquire about the reunions and stuff through Simplifying America's Fun, because they pay for the flights, the venue,
Wow.
the food, everything but the alcohol. Understandable.
Well, double it right there.
So I actually got to introduce them back in September at a large event, and that's whatever I said. I said exactly that. I was telling how incredible they were. I said, so they're good stewards of your money, because they're not going to just blow money on a bunch of veterans for their alcohol. So
they've been there. I've been there, done that, I'm sure.
yeah. So
there's nothing like that. And Mike, this is, a lot of people ask about the book, and rightfully so. This is, so how'd you get all these interviews? This was not done with interviews. It was capturing what could be captured every time there was an opportunity to capture it. Along at the same time, just doing a lot of study and research over the years and all that kind of stuff. But what I was trying to capture was not the X's and O's, as much as how'd you get stuff done? How did this really work? I mean, all this kind of stuff. Don Swindle was watching. Guess he was watching Band of Brothers. Yeah, he was. He called me and was watching Band of Brothers. Yeah, I'm watching this Band of Brothers. And they're out there and they're marching up down the line and they're yelling, telling the guys, nobody had to yell at us. We knew what we were doing, and so there's all this kind of stuff all the time. And this steady banter. But pay attention to that, if you're me later on. In all these conversations, there's a hint here, there's a tidbit there, and later on when you could digitalize all this stuff, transcribe everything, and line them up, you started to see the patterns. And he just referenced that thing over there we don't have anything on, which means he was there, which means 3rd Platoon was there, which means, that kind of stuff. So paying attention to those guys, and especially with the NCOs, Sam Haddad, he and I went at it forever. He was just hammering away, chiseling away at the rocks in my head, that get control out of your head. That would not get it done on Iwo Jima. That'd get us all killed. It was not a matter of control. And so this mission leadership thing, and he never used the term, never did. Mission command, he didn't articulate things that way. But that's exactly what it was. And when you study warfighting and the Al Gray's documents out of 89, et cetera, still with the Marine Corps, it is exactly what these guys learned and what they were hammering away at me on from Iwo Jima. So paying attention to those fine points can be very important. I drifted there. Sorry about that, but it's all about listening and paying attention to what I think are the right things, and that is they're together for a reason. What's that like? And just being with them for a while, after a while, you started to feel that, and there was a unique flavor that you could taste when you were with Fox Company, going to dinner, and when you were away, you forgot it. But when you get back with them again, there it is again. But you never would have known it otherwise, until you're together with them.
How did you link up with them the first time?
Dumb luck. The thing about it's again those principles that we talk about, leadership principles or warfighting principles, concentration of effort, and all that. I was calling when it was time to, I thought, really try to reach out to veterans and not look like a complete fool, right? So, been doing the work for years, and now it's time. Let me go start finding the guys and see if I can get a little smarter. And then you call the VFW and the American Legion in the early 90s, and they say, well, no, they don't really hang out here. What you need to do is go where they go, and that's their reunions. and they list them in the back of the magazines. Come by and I'll give you a stack of magazines. I'm like, sweet. So I go by there and holy cow, look at all these things. It was like a menu you couldn't get enough of. Well, I don't have enough money to go to all these places, fighter squadron reunions and all this. Went all over the place. And I just happened to see this one that said 2F-23, which I thought was interesting that it said that. But it said, Roy Namura, Saipan, Tini, and Iwo Jima, and having a reunion in Charleston, and the point of contacts in Rock Hill, South Carolina. Oh, home territory for me. Now this sounds, doable. So I called him up, and we had a conversation. That's how that started. Literally thumbing down through all these units, and they just happened to be one of the units that I picked and went to visit. And it was very much like a family reunion, and they welcomed me in there and spent a great deal of time. And I thought, I got to get back. And that's how that developed.
That's incredible.
Well, just dumb luck.
I wonder if they still do that list. I've never even heard of that before. The listing of the unit reunions.
What's funny is I still have all of them, but I've still got the magazines with highlighted.
You have the first one still?
Yeah.
The
ones they handed me, I went back in with a highlighter, and I would go through and try to mark ones I thought, let's give this one a shot.
That's really cool. So, going from that, like, I guess one of the next thoughts I have is, when did Fox Company stop being history and start becoming personal for you?
That's an interesting question. In the 90s, boy, documentaries were all the rage. I mean, here they came through the mid 90s. And you had the Discovery Channel, and then the History Channel came along, and A&E, and it was one after the next. And we set our video recorders, if we had to work, to catch these things, because you'd never seen all this stuff.
Yeah.
And you just ate it up. So it was very much alive. This is before Saving Private Ryan in 98. And we were, I say we, I mean, it was hot. It was all over the place. So it was very much real and current by virtue of that. So when I went to talk with the guys, and I knew where they'd been, and I knew something about each of those things, I could envision in many cases what they were, on the cliffs of Saipan. Well, I knew about those cliffs, and I know that's at the end, and so, et cetera. When they start talking about the bonsai, did you guys see the bonsai? That kind of stuff. Well, we saw lights and flashlights and fires and torches and whatever. Oh, okay. So it was not, even at that point, it was not sort of ancient history. It was real. Now, a follow-on to that, which I think is relevant, in 98, and we were all just hitting the internet along about that time, 96, 97, 98, about 97. 98, out comes Saving Private Ryan. And Brother Dale Dye has done his duty and gotten this squared away. And in AOL, which was all the rage, much of the internet, that's where a lot of people started, and myself included, but they had these chat rooms, and they were flooded with millions of people who were sons and daughters and nephews and uncles, and I had no idea what was in there. It was, they had no idea that their dad, walking around in a little light blue Sears jacket and tennis shoes, was out there doing this stuff, or witnessing it, or experiencing it. Sure.
Yeah.
So it was a massive eye-opening thing in 98 that came along, and these guys were certainly aware of that. And by the way, one of our Navy corpsmen, Danny Thomas, we say Danny Thomas is what the act? No, Danny B. Thomas. That movie did it to him. He said, I didn't know any better, and I went to see that thing by myself. And he said, about, I don't know how long into it, but the landing wasn't going under. And he said, next thing, he said, I was sitting next to this young couple, and when I kind of came to, they were sitting on either side of me, holding my arms, saying it's just a movie. But he was absolutely in tears, and that woke him up. And it was that year that I met him, and just by happenstance, I was looking for, I had email lists and all that stuff that would go around. I was looking for more corpsmen out of the 2nd Battalion. In fact, in Foss Company, I knew that there was a young corpsman they had mentioned. Anybody knew that young corpsman that showed up after Bankham was evacuated? No, I didn't know who he was. Never saw him before. So I'm sending out an email to this fellow named Danny B. Thomas, who listed as E Company. Reach out to him, said, I'm with Foss Company and so forth. And he replied, I joined Foss Company late on Iwo Jima. And he said, there's one sergeant in particular I remember, a big, tall, dark sergeant named Sam Haddad. I wonder if he's still alive. I said, I'm seeing him in 2 weeks at the reunion. You got to go. And he did. He showed up and we went. Those kinds of experience. And when I saw that email, I got up and ran through the house a few times, just back and forth. Found him, this thing. That whole period of time was bringing this history to life to the generation who not heard any of it, really.
Yeah.
So it was very active in the mid 90s. It was live and in person. And these folks they just retired a few years ago, 10 years earlier. So they were out and about. That's a long-winded answer to your question, but it was very real at the time, and was until when you lose the guys, then all of a sudden, the engines shut down and you're adrift in space. It's silent. And then in Texas, we got a bunch of family members together again and had a little mini reunion after the Iwo Jima commemoration. And I'm here to tell you, the engines fired right back up. It was just like having the guys there and having all these folks in the room together. And I'm looking at this going, oh, the history that's here wasn't in the presentation. I asked, going through the storyline, and I would ask these folks to stand up individually as we went along. And you could feel it in the auditorium. It was as though Gunny Douglas was there, even though it was his daughter or whatever. So there are interesting ways to literally keep it alive and keep it palpable. And the families are part of that.
Yeah, that you're talking about what happened at the hotel later that night.
Oh yeah, the reunion that night. Yeah.
Yeah.
I threw a little mini reunion to get all these folks. Otherwise, they'd never had a chance to meet each other or get together. So we had a little reunion over there.
That was great. And yeah, I got pictures from that and just seeing, everybody, the big picture of everybody there together. I mean, that's pretty special. That's things like that, because of where we are, those are kind of more newer, getting families together, I think, because, prior to the World War II veterans, World War I guys, and I don't even know if I want to start down the rabbit hole if they had reunions and, like sending carrier pigeons to each other's house or something to get in touch. God knows, how those guys would have linked back up. But yeah, having the families there, and I actually was texting with Julie Wright recently, and we're going to have them come back on, just how they had them unite there. It was at the conference, right?
It was, yeah.
What was it? It was something like, it was her aunt and his dad.
His dad.
Is that correct?
Her grandmother. So her grandmother is Ensign Jane Kendi, the Navy flight nurse, who by chance became the first to land in an active combat zone on 6 March on Iwo, when her boss, the navigator of her plane, missed the island. So Jane's number 2 plane landed first, and by chance, she became the first to do that. And she's photographed by Lieutenant Gil DeWitt, and she's kneeling over a Marine comforting, and he's bandaged up like crazy. And that's Bill Wyckoff, Sergeant Bill Wyckoff from Foss Company.
Yeah.
And they were reunited 41 years later at the Camp Pendleton Iwo Jima reunion with all the units. And they reenacted that, and they kind of played. I've done a film on that I'm holding on to. It's about a 30-minute documentary on this whole scenario.
We'll have to keep an ey out. Good to know.
Absolutely. The short of it is they ran a little fake, and they had hoped to, and told her they had hoped to have the Marine on the stretcher there to meet her that night. and played her an audio recording of Bill sending her a message. Wish I wanted to be there, so forth. Well, Eddie Davis had told me years ago he was there, and he said since I'd been the runner, they had me act like I was running out there with the message, which was that Bill is actually here. And then they brought him out, and they were reunited there. And I've got her photographs and all that of that reenactment or of that reunion. So for the first time in Texas, when we were there in February this year, then as soon as I told him, I was losing it already before I could get to it. But anyway, we brought them up to meet for the first time, her granddaughter Julie and Bill Jr. And that was again, that's the real stuff, and everybody could feel it. That's the real stuff.
It gave me bitch eyes for sure. Like I'm sitting there, because I mean, I had no idea what was going on. Like, just when everybody was standing up and everybody was being introduced, and the only person really that I knew, well, other than Scott and Tracy and those folks, Clint, I did know Keith Kohler. I'd been to his house. I flew up to St. Louis for Charlie's celebration of life. Other than that, though, it was a very new, raw experience. Y'all did such an incredible job, like everybody that spoke. And I want to say it was our last podcast. It was last Tuesday. It was the 2025 is Cooked episode where Neil and I were talking about everything, and we talked about Julie and Bill. And she listened to it and then sent me a message. I'd love to come on, because we're like, you know what? We should bring them on in like February.
Great.
Wasn't it like 40 years to the day whenever her grandmother and his dad met? It was like 84. And then
so it was Saturday, 22nd of February, 1986, and then Saturday, the 22nd of February, 2025. Yeah, I mean, it was crazy. Once we realized that, I thought, I'm laying that out there.
I'm tearing up, man. I'm like, what the hell's going on? I thought we're just going to hear about war.
It's a massive thing, and I got myself, unfortunately, with that presentation, which you don't want to do. You got to hold it together. Especially when you're in front of a bunch of Marines, you cannot ever do that. But I had it set up in such a way that all of a sudden now this plane lands and goes by, and I had that set up. And on board is 22-year-old Ensign Jane Kendi, and she's just become the first Navy flight nurse to land in the. Well, I was losing it already.
Yeah,
that just that intro right there choked me up, and I thought I'm not going to get through this. But it was such an epic moment, and. All of that stuff, the reason, the three presentations I loved. I loved Rich Frank's. I loved John Parshall's presentations. So powerful. And they knew that I was going to come in at the operational level at Iwo Jima by design. Now, I did it my way. I mean, the way I do PMEs, et cetera, that's one thing to know things, right? Facts, or even understand some things, but it's a different thing altogether to feel it.
Yeah.
And you might remember that the premise of my presentation was that it's very easy to think that this was a done deal when we go to Iwo Jima, because we got all this superior firepower and all this kind of stuff. And I'm going to show you otherwise. And so we go through the day landing, from in the landing craft with Dick Nisley and making that landing and seeing where they landed and what it was like, and hearing from them a little bit to get to the airfield, and then jump to northern Iwo Jima and feel that. And then Jane Kendi and Bill Wyckoff happening in the middle of that. All of that is experiential. And then having the family members there with us lit that thing up. And to me, that's good history, because it's keeping it alive. It's bringing it to life. It's not facts, and it's not X's and O's.
Yeah. No, it was beautiful. I loved it. And that's what I'm saying. The way that you did the storytelling, from a combat veteran's perspective, I'm sitting there following, and then, to get into the family members, and then because it's weird. And I don't know if you've heard this from, the Fox guys, but man, I experience this disassociation sometimes. And it, just to be real, raw, honest, it fucks me up sometimes. And I have to it feels like there's two versions of me. There is the, enlisted younger version of me that did, war things. Mm-hmm. And then there's the dude now that's like, what? and it's almost like I can't kind of sometimes fathom some of the things that I did. Did I guess before I go on with that real quick, have you ever heard anything like that
Oh
from
yeah.
like the Fox guys where like it
Yeah.
doesn't even feel like that was you, you know?
Yes, and the other thing was in their view, and it's not going to be any different. You're over in the sandbox over there or somewhere else. They had been sent off to another universe and had no idea they would ever be sent home. Therefore, they're going to survive. And when they start witnessing things and they start figuring out what it's going to take to survive, and these folks don't know when to quit, et
Yeah.
cetera, et cetera. So things happen. And I know, one of the Marines specifically, years ago, I sent a questionnaire out to kind of get some frame of reference on everybody. What did you do? When did you do it? Because they would move from machine gun unit to rifle unit to this, that, and the other. And I was trying to track who did what. This was before I had muster rolls and all that garbage. But some of the questions the answer would come back, sorry. That's all you got. You didn't get any more than that. They weren't going to go there.
Yeah.
And later on, as one of them said, I did things back then that I'm ashamed of. Granted, I got you. I believe it. I get it. Story. Yeah, sure. There's a whole lot of that. And later on, you go, well, you know what? As Gunny Douglas said, we were sent off to a different world back then. And you come home and you think, ooh, that doesn't fit, with being home anymore. If I'm articulating correctly what you're saying.
Yeah, it's almost like the brain does something to disassociate you from like the crazy and sometimes crazy bad things that you did. Which we do know the brain has its defense mechanisms, and we could go down like a couple hours talking about PTSD and all of those different things. But yeah, it's just curious as to hear your personal experiences with the guys from Fox, because we do talk a lot about, man, the guys back in 1775 are exactly like the guys in Montezuma, Bella Wood, Ewo. And I even joke about how you have Olympians swimming faster, jumping further, baseball pitchers pitching harder. But Marines are just the same. I think that we're just de-evolved humans. There's something in our DNA that you've got guys, because part of my job was demolitions and anti-tank rockets, anti-bunker rockets, and things like that. And so what do all Marines do when they get a long rocket in their hands? And then we see pictures from guys in World War II and Vietnam, and I'm like, and then I'm reading books on Bella Wood, and guys are joining because they want to get chicks and wear the dress blues, and I'm like, Jesus, dude, it's been 100 years. Like, we're all the same. So, I think it's great, and the reason I kind of asked that question is for a lot of us new generation guys, the new breed, maybe if you want to call it that. I don't know what we're called, Generation Kill, whatever name they come up with, is you finding those parallels that were not so dissimilar from the guys that came before us, not just even in the combat perspective, but in the human perspective, that we all kind of deal with it the same. And I think whenever, like, when you get around guys and that you're handling things the same way, even in group chats that we have, there's something oddly reassuring there, that you're still suffering together, and that lets you keep going, that you're not alone. So, and yeah, the guys, the World War II guys, this was the second part. What I was going to go into was, even being a combat veteran, man, standing there, like, for me, the only real battlefield I've been to is Peleliu, and standing on the beach and looking at that airfield that they ran across and going up into the coral ridges. I'm like, how the hell did they, how the hell did they do, like, and I said on another podcast with Tim, like, not just how the hell did anybody survive? How the hell did they just do what they did? above and beyond survive. And sorry if this is wrong, and instantly correct me if I am. Part of your presentation was really on like the fire team. That was your part, right?
It was, yeah. Yep.
Okay, because there's 4 different speakers, right? There was Kyle, there was Rich,
And John Parshall, yeah.
John Parshall.
Yep.
Thank you. And so obviously Kyle's was on the flag raisers.
Yep, right.
But I was pretty confident yours was on, and I don't think people realize like a corporal in the United States Marine Corps, the power of that position, the NCO is the backbone of the Marine Corps. And so when you were talking about how the fire team won, Iwo Jima.
Yep.
That was, dude, I was like, fuck yeah, dude. I'm like, oh, because that's us junior enlisted guys, us four and done guys. Like, we get pretty pumped and motivated about that stuff. And yeah, that was it was a beautiful presentation. I know it was recorded. I want to say maybe the Pacific Museum in Fredericksburg has it on their website.
Right. Yeah, it's on YouTube as well.
Yeah. I'll have to
but you're right.
Those then.
Okay, great. Yeah, very much the point of the discussion in Northern Iwo Jima, which nobody gets. I say nobody, is that what won that was 3 Marines and a leader, or 2 Marines and a leader, or whatever it was. Or I used to say Iwo Jima was won by 2 Marines 30,000 times over. But that's how it's done. There used to be the old Gunny Renstrom, Keith Renstrom, when he was with Fox Company in North Carolina in 42, early 43, before the split, before they formed the 25th Marines out of the 23rd, and he went with them. But he was a sergeant, just made sergeant, and the Gunny, 40-year-old Gunny in Fox Company, told him, Gunny Gallagher said, I want you to study up for gunnery sergeant. He goes, what? Gunnery sergeant? He goes, yeah, they're going to ask you a bunch of questions. I'm going to tell you what they are. And we're going to get you out. You need to be gunnery sergeant. One of the questions was, there's a point to this story. One of the questions was, and you remember very clearly, you've got 100 yards of beach to defend and 10 Marines. How are you going to array your Marines? And he said, I'd been briefed up fully. He goes, well, of course, you're going to dig 5 holes and put 2 Marines in each. He said, why are you going to do that? He said, well, it's a known fact. You get 1 Marine by himself, he might get up and run, but you put 2 Marines together, they'll stay. And so one of the answers he got, one of the other questions was, how far into the woods do you go before you start coming out? It was halfway. But anyway, point being, the alone is the enemy. Always.
Yeah.
Aloneness. It's that way in business or anything else you do, isolation, and combat veterans coming back. Alone is the enemy, and you ever allow it in combat. It is not a good thing, and it's core to what the Marine Corps is all about, and the establishment, the ability to respond to chaos and still make the right thing happen when it needs to, the right way, was why they formed the 4-man fire team, and then trained at it and tried to get good at utilizing it as well as they could. And so the guys that go to Iwo Jima, those NCOs, are all veterans through the Marianas and had been at the Marshals too, all of them. So the replacements that came out in 44 at Thanksgiving and then early right before Iwo Jima, none of those guys are leading fire teams or squads or any of that stuff. These are all combat veterans, and a lot of your replacements now are their privates in those fire teams, the green ones that get thrown in there in the combat. So they understood that, and I think it's when you start seeing that picture as well, when you start looking at the casualties, who those casualties are on days like the 6th of March, and how many of those guys are corporals. There's a reason for that. And one big reason for that is because they've now got these brand new replacements in their teams that they've got a mother hen, and they're up and about having to manage instead of just letting things happen as they naturally would otherwise. Just facts of life, but it's important to understand those things.
If there was one truth about Iwo Jima that you think that most people don't understand, what is it?
That probably what we just articulated. It was won by two Marines who'd be dadgum if they're going to let each other down.
Do you think that most people? Well, I think most people don't realize when the flag raising took place,
Oh, it's early on, yeah.
right?
Yeah, it was. It's the fifth day of a 36-day battle. Now it meant a lot to the guys. Now anybody who was headed the other direction, 2 miles away, 223 is 2 miles away. They're in Corps Reserve, but they're up beyond the first airfield, and somebody sees this, and of course they hear all the noise and the ships and all that stuff, and they can look over there, maybe with binoculars, and see that the flag's up. Well, that's a good thing. Now they can't shoot us maybe from that direction, but that's what it meant to them.
Yeah.
And to most of them. Now, to some, it was great because this was god awful and everybody knew it. And to see that flag going up was, okay, we're here to stay. Yeah, we're going to get this done. So it was highly motivating, but it was not a victory in any particular sense. They were concerned. That was the high ground on the whole daggum island. And they've got all the observation and all the firing. And if they're still firing up there, that's the way the guys looked at it. You just take that away from them, please. And to see that their buddies in a different division over there, maybe in the 5th Division, going up the mountain and putting that flag up there. Yeah, here we go. That's good to go.
That it's a win. It's not the win.
No, yeah.
And I guess the reason I kind of, led into it and asked that question is because personally, I feel that most people probably see that flag raising and think like, oh, like that's the win. Right? That's when someone raises their flag. And I kind of want to get a little bit more into it because I feel like you're going this direction and I was starting to feel it, that they were able to look back. How did that moment, seeing that flag up there, how much of an impact did it have on the guys moving forward into the battle still to come?
I would probably preface it this way and try this one out. General Snowden, Larry Snowden, who had been Fox Company's commander at Iwo Jima, and when he finally retired, he was assistant commandant of the Marine Corps. So he was in 37 and a half years. But he said, that we have planes and ships and all this kind of stuff, but the battles like this were won by Marines going ashore and planting the flag in the ground and saying, we're in charge. Well, okay, so we did that. And we got up on the mountain and we said, we're in charge. Yeah. And the Japanese were saying, yeah, we'll see about that. And all the Marines knew, now, here we go, right? So the rest of this fight now is to prove that we're in charge. And the Japanese obviously have a plan. And it's nothing they've ever done before. And that is, we can't even see them. They're staying underground, and they're only coming out at night, usually looking for water. And they bomb the dickens out of us in a coordinated way, which we've never seen before. And when we move forward and bomb the heck out of that piece of ground, there's nothing there. Maybe a few weapons, and they keep pulling their casualties back, and we can't tell if we're doing well or not. But we're moving forward. Well, we'd seen some of this on Saipan, but they certainly did it on Iwo Jima. So for the Marines, that starts getting frustrating, and it's screwing with your mind too, because you can't sleep at night, because that's when they're coming out.
Right.
And some of the nightmares that the Marines had immediately when they left Iwo Jima. Roy Stewart talked about that. Got on the ship when he was leaving Iwo Jima, and he couldn't sleep all night, woke with nightmares that he'd fallen asleep on watch, and the Japanese had jumped in the hole and killed Jack Sims, his buddy, which is all he cared about, his buddy. It's not that they killed him. Yeah. He was dreaming about failing his buddy. That was his nightmare. Yeah. So that's the vice, the tension in the vice that was cranking down on these guys from then on Iwo Jima, and trying to work together as a team. They couldn't get combined arms together in that terrain on Iwo Jima. The tank infantry team, which was so important, just could not really get together and work as it's supposed to. And so it was a big deal in the eastern part of Iwo Jima for the 4th Marine Division. It was a big deal on the morning of the 8th of March when some tanks did get up there and got up there with Fox Company. That had not been possible before. All the I wrote an article for the Marine Corps Gazette a couple of years ago, 2-part article on Iwo Jima, the battle for coordination, which is to say Iwo Jima was a battle for coordination. And you got to win that battle before you're going to win the battle. And so that's what I highlighted. And maybe that's the truth about Iwo Jima that people don't understand. They're struggling every day. The Japanese did a superb job immediately in Iwo Jima of breaking the team apart and keeping it from getting together. And the Marines fought the rest of the time on Iwo Jima to get the band back together. That's what they were fighting for. And so my challenge to the Marine Corps today and to anybody else is, it's one thing to go in with a plan. What's your plan to fight to get back together when it's disrupted? Because by God, the enemy's going to work on disrupting it in a lot of different ways. Are you prepared to do that? On Iwo Jima, by God, amazingly, it was the dozer tank that was so helpful in helping get the team back together. But it was the tankers, the engineers fighting all this time to get up there with the infantry. And you could only get, and finally they got, I think, 3 tanks up there that morning. And let me hammer that just for a moment. And I pointed out in the article. So Major Bob Neiman, who commanded C Company 4 Tank Battalion, who worked so much with the 23rd Marines, and they've been, you say the higher levels, regiment and battalion assets, mortars they're ineffective, can't really help the guys up there in the rocks. Any open terrain is not open. There's rocks all over the place. If there's a trail, it's mined, and it's covered by anti-tank guns and mortars and rockets. But the weapons themselves are in the rocky jungle. That's where you've got to get. You have no choice but to go after it. And the tanks can't go in there with you. So they're struggling to get together and get anything done. And on the morning of the 8th of March, here it is. Battalion's finally got some tanks up there. And it's Bob Neiman, and we know it's Max English in the tank up there. We know that, and here they are with Fox Company. And the Fox Company's commander at that time, Lieutenant, now Captain Charlie Ahern, is up front on point with his company, trying to push down this long corridor, big wide corridor down to Tachi Iwo Point. And here they are together. And he's talking to them he's got comms, direct comms with Max English in that tank. And they're trying to hit these targets, and they're still not getting it done as well as he thinks they should.
Right.
Here they are together, physically together, side by side, practically. Now, they have to stay away because the Japanese are making those tanks radioactive with mortar rounds.
Yeah.
But they're still not getting it done. There's still a gap. And there's only one man that could close that gap and achieve the state that we call team. And it's Charlie Ahern. And he figures the only way he can do that is when we share the same view of the target. And the only way we can do that is I'm at the tank. And he runs out into the mortar barrage behind the tank, grabs the phone, and now they share the same view. Now they function as a team. As close as they were, that's how big a fight it is to achieve that state and how tough it is. And Charlie got it done right there on Iwo Jima.
Yeah, tanks, for anybody who doesn't know, which is probably a lot of people that stumble across these podcasts, there's some beautiful things about tanks. One is, like you said, the Japanese are making them radioactive. What the hell does that mean? That means that the tanks are taking a lot of the attention away from the guys like me, right? Which is nice. It's nice. They're a big target. Might not be so nice and comfortable for the guys in the tank, but as we saw one of those tanks, remember, in the museum in Peleliu. Was that from Peleliu or was that from a different? I can't remember which island that was from.
There may be.
When we did the museum tour out there, it was all shredded up. Man.
It's got to be that one. Yeah, it's got to be that. I don't know if one elsewhere.
Yeah, I think so. Also, there's a pretty and maybe not so much for the guy, probably not at all for the guys in the Pacific, but for normal human being enemies, not so much maybe the Japanese. When you see a tank, that's kind of your sign to like take off. You don't want to go up head to head. The Japanese, as we know, that they were relentless. They didn't surrender. For them, they didn't care. Tank had no intimidation factor whatsoever. But in my experiences, like, it definitely did. It made people take off and run and not really want to face what we had coming at it. But really, it drawing the fire and drawing the attention, and then the cannon on those things and the damage that they can do and the support they can give you. Like you said, right there in real time. You're not calling an artillery unit or directing fire coordination from aircraft or naval gunfire, things like that. But that thing is right there with you. And there's the phone. And even the Abrams, still have the phone. You can pick it up, talk to the guys inside, let them know, be their eyes and their ears on the outside.
Sharing that same view. Well, the Marines had worked so hard to get the tanks and infantry together so that they'd work together. And they had stumbled along the way. One of the things they did going to Saipan before they went there, the tank folks had offered, let's say, classes on how to work together with tanks
Yeah.
and what tanks could do and what they shouldn't be asked to do and all this kind of stuff. And the infantry units sent representatives who were not the officers that would actually be working with them on the battlefield. And so much of the value of that was lost. And they realized we just dropped the ball. This is
Yeah.
4th Marine Division. And they didn't do that again. And next time they got the infantry up there and the officers, and they practiced working with them, and they practiced on Saipan, and they achieved what they thought looked great. And it was a great scheme on the board. And they called that coordination. And that was a scheme, a schematic. That didn't work on Iwo Jima. Now, what happened on Iwo Jima was that they couldn't, tanks were a great source of comfort for Marines on Saipan or Tinian, not on Iwo Jima. They were radioactive, and you didn't want them around because they were drawing all this fire. So the Japanese were highly coordinated with their fires on Iwo Jima where they had not been previously. So they would smother a tank with mortar fire and all that stuff to scatter the infantry, and then run out there and attack it with a mine and blow it up that direction. And did that numerous times. They also did have white phosphorus, and they would use that as well to keep the infantry away. So they did a terrific job, literally, of keeping that team apart and fracturing it. So it was a real fight to get it back together, where you could use that firepower, whatever it looked like. If it was one tank, it didn't matter. Bring that firepower. And the Japanese had very effective anti-tank guns up there that knocked out end mines and knocked all those tanks out, every one of them.
Yeah, and here we are talking about, the power of tanks from, back on Iwo Jima to, my time in Iraq. And now the Marine Corps doesn't even have tanks.
Mm-mm.
It's interesting, like, because and I'm sitting there and I'm listening to you talk about how back then, and it's like lessons learned, and it's because when we were trained with our involvement with tanks, it was to stay the hell away from them unless somebody needed to use that phone. And so the lessons learned, like, they are big targets. So back then on Iwo Jima, bad, right? Because it was disrupting the coordination of the O3s and the guys there on the ground. But for us, it was kind of like, good, like go push that tank out, and it's going to be the first thing to get shot at, and then we're going to find out like where we got to go, what building we got to go into next. And it's definitely it's always fascinates me kind of to hear something and then think about how the things that they did applied to over time, right? Just like the lessons we learned about Higgins boats getting caught up on coral reefs, and now you look at our amphibious landing vehicles and the tracked vehicles that evolved from that. How and that's another thing, going back to like, how the hell did they do it? They didn't have any like previous learning experience. To quote our loved Bruce McKenna from the Pacific and some Band of Brothers and all that good stuff, before World War II, minus Bellawood, because we did some badass stuff there, my 6 Marines. But before World War II, Marines were just a bunch of pirates. Yeah. And World War II is where we kind of became, the most badass people on earth. Definitely, from a military branch perspective, at least in our own eyes, right? We're all heroes in our own eyes.
Well, they had to do so much so rapidly, from the quick transition to Amtrak's within a month before going out for the first operation for the 4th Marine Division, which didn't play out well in the Marshalls, and thankfully that was mercifully short operation, thanks in large part to Admiral Nimitz making the profound decision to bypass the heavily defended islands. Very lucky, that's good, but learning how to use those things effectively. And then learning the lessons learned. So this was about 6 months between each operation for these guys. And to watch them, to track their adaptation and implementation of lessons learned between operations is worthy of close attention. They could really pull it together and continue to evolve. So the Japanese. You've got Kobayashi on Iwo Jima, and that's important of things to come when you get to Okinawa and all this kind of stuff. You're getting to the folks who understand concentration and massing and all these kinds of things. But anyway, they adapted very, very rapidly and put these things together and learned a whole lot of stuff. They were exceptionally highly trained going to Iwo as well. So, I would tell you also in the 5th Marine Division, the radios, the field radios, the SCR 300s came to them a little later than they got to the 4th Marine Division. So they couldn't outfit their tanks in the same way with these things before they went to Iwo. So they had to operate differently and communicate differently. And they tended to push the tanks out first with the infantry following behind.
Yeah.
When they could get them into the terrain. And some of the other regiments, 24th, when they had an opportunity to bring them out there, that's what they did as well. But it really, back to your point, it's really what the tank represented. And it represented the ability to concentrate a tremendous amount of firepower at the point of contact. It's not about the tank with treads on it with medium velocity, 75 millimeter, all this kind of stuff. But that's what it represented. So the infantry's up there, they got, K-bars and M1s and BARs and all this, et cetera, and some light machine guns and some 60 millimeters. And now they got a big old brute that can come up there and stay for a while. Now they're going to move forward.
Yeah.
And that's what it represented. And I think that's what the Marine Corps needs to be finding today if it's still going to be offensive minded and not just a defensive force, like defensive battalions. Then what's that concentration of fire look like at the point of contact, and whether it's tanks or something else? So, but if you don't have that, you're not ready to get after it in some unexpected way. So I don't know what the answer to that is, but that's the question in my view.
I got a question again. I want to kind of trying to think of the best way to word this. So I guess I'm going to throw it out there because you got to sit around and talk with these guys and just hear their stories. And I think that's with your experience, which makes it so cool, is it wasn't a sit down interview. I ask you questions, you give me answers. It was you were with them, you were around them, you heard their stories, like you became like their historian, you became one of them, accepted, and it's so much different than how other people write books. They look at something, they might ask some people some questions, and that's where I think you're not just a storyteller, you are this custodian, you're this conduit of information. All that to say, when you were sitting around, I'm just curious because I always go back to my my young Marine thoughts. Did you ever hear them talk stories, tell stories, bitching? Because like we Marines always bitch. We always kind of sometimes say we're not happy if we're not bitching. We'll bitch about guys in planes. We'll bitch about guys in tracked vehicles and tanks, and kind of how they don't have to walk.
Yeah.
Were you ever just sitting around with them at one of the reunions or hanging out with them, and stories come up about like, yeah, they were getting blown up, like they were taking a lot of fire, but they didn't have to walk anywhere.
I don't remember hearing that one, but they would have you in stitches when they got started, and once again, as a civilian coming into this, but having been part of a high performance team, I also could recognize those things that are triggers of high performance teams and the way things go. And it was a lot of fun. You mentioned that Don Swindle, who's my great close buddy in the Fox Company. We called him Upper Crust after a trip out to the Marianas and the way he was treated out there. But he would often say all the time, I was probably the bitchingest Marine in the Marine Corps, and all this kind of stuff. And I wanted to know what was going on. And I was too nosy. I wouldn't sleep at night, all this kind of stuff. And he would tell you what the other units around him were doing. And they got in trouble again over there, and all this kind of stuff. So there was a lot of funny stuff like that. And it depends on who was together. If you got two buddies together, get that recorder going, because you could capture what that dynamic was. And this is how they fought.
Yeah.
And when they dug in at night and they found the beer and they dig it in, what do they do next? And this is what you've just recorded, is how that plays out. And it's not where they moved on the ground. That's easy, or that's not easy, but get that nailed down. Now let's find out what they really did. And that's what you're after. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and that's the thing is like, you know, what was it? Is it? I'm drawing a blank on it right now in the Pacific. I want to say it was like episode 3, and we got to talk with Bruce about. I told him it was one of my favorite episodes. Whenever Lecky's has the relationship, you know, and he's like, man, he's like, I'm glad to hear you say that because so many people give me shit about it being like too lovey and everything like that. But as you know firsthand, because you're there, you're not just there getting the war story. You are there getting the human experience,
the war experience.
Yeah, it just, and they're humans. You see them as the humans that they are, and that's what I told Bruce. I felt he did with that episode is they showed us as humans, not just these war machines. But you got to sit around a bunch of guys and get to know them on a level, the human level. And I think that's pretty awesome.
It's uncommon.
Yeah,
not everybody has that opportunity, and just as it played out after so many years, and the guys at our last reunion, especially Charlie Ahern, Captain Ahern, came around. He wasn't speaking much anymore. He in his 90s, and just he did. I had him going at the reunion, and his son was amazed. But he came around after that last reunion dinner, and just walked over around and shook my hand and looked me in the eye and gave me that little grin that kicked me in the rear end. And I had already answered the question a couple of times. I don't think a book can be done. It's just they didn't have, generally speaking, they didn't have coherent stories much. They had, I remember, well, a sergeant ran out and picked this guy up, and we were at such and such. They didn't know when that was or who it was sometimes.
Yeah.
Or little things, or I was, well, when so and so was, we had a sergeant who was going to try to talk these Japanese out of a bunker. Well, later I know exactly what he's talking about because somebody else mentioned it and so forth. And then you've got to put them together. So there were not generally lengthy stories. So, but if you got enough, and later on, and I had never listened to all those tapes until I started the book and pulled them out and digitized them, recorded them and digitized and transcribed them. So now you had stuff, something. And the funny stories, which, as you know, in combat veterans, things get funny. And it's weird it's odd what gets funny, but it does. And those are the things you got to remember because that's the experience. When they were going to do the book, Texas A&M University Press, right? And they were concerned that, number one, about the title. What's Black Dragon mean? Is that some derivative, thing, or what is this? And I had to explain that. Well, then let's work on that subtitle. The experience of a Marine rifle company in the Central Pacific is too long. Yes, it is. However, it has to be. That's what it is.
Yeah.
So in this book, we are endeavoring to capture and convey the experience of being out there in a rifle company during the war. Who else has done that? So this is what it is. You've got to use this as the subtitle. Otherwise, you're missing the point.
Right.
And they did. And then they agreed with that. They understood that. Well, no, that's exactly right. It's what it has to be. So it is from that angle. That's the reason, that guides your decision-making as you go along doing the book. What you're writing, what you really need to dig into, and what do you not really need to dig into, how does it contribute to understanding that experience or feeling it? And if they're going to go do something, we need to understand why they're going over there to do that, and what's happening around them, and then we'll get it. And that's so you cover it. So you have to pop up to higher levels occasionally for the proper context, and then back down in the dirt with these guys and convey it. But some of the funny stories, there's no way that I was not able to capture them or convey them in written form the way I remember Don Millison telling the story, which makes me laugh just watching him tell it.
Yeah.
It's just impossible, but they were hilarious.
I definitely would find it. Man, it'd be super difficult to put some of those stories on paper. The old saying of like you had to be there.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Kinda, so.
Well, you had to, if you saw Don Millison's his movements and his actions, his responses, that's what made it hilarious. And you get to know how I'm thinking of the story when they had beer, they got Japanese beer on Saipan, and they dug in and they would bury the beer to try to cool it off, it's so hot out there. And one of the runners came around, don't drink the beer, they've poisoned it. And he freezes up and has this look. And that's what I remember seeing. And that's only Don Millicent can do that. And it was hilarious. And then after a pause, his buddy says, Don, what are we going to do? And after another pause, he says, well, in the morning, if I'm still alive, I'm going to drink the rest of that beer. Only Millicent could tell that in the way that Millicent said it in the first place. But it was hilarious. Those kinds of stories, and they just really happened. Oh, the dude got his coffee shot out of his hand by a sniper, so he grabbed his weapon and went off into the woods to find him.
Yeah,
just because he shot his coffee.
Yeah, you don't fuck with our creature comforts.
No.
Coffee. Yeah. I was big on sunlight. That was a big one of mine. Like in Afghanistan, when we're up in the mountains, it would get so cold, and then some guy would want to come stand there and talk to you while you're just laying there trying to warm up from the sun, and he'd stand right in your sunlight. Get the out of the sun. Just we don't have a lot in life, man. Like don't mess with it. Don't shoot my coffee. Probably I could see a guy like that saying, like, I'd rather he shot me in the arm than shoot my coffee.
Yeah, don't shoot my coffee. Yeah. There's a lot of that was very valuable. And Slim Gardner, great big 6'4", 6'5", skinny guy, and then Miguel Mauricio, the shortest guy in the company, and Gardner would always remind him of it. With some of the funniest, driest Texas humor. But you got to try to capture some of that as well. And then there's other stuff that you don't put in the book. You just don't. If Hollywood were ever to do a thing with it, that's what they'd go after. I am not giving it to them.
Yeah.
But you just, there's plenty out there. So again, that's part of that wartime experience.
And and it's, and it's also part of being, a respectful custodian of these men's stories and their lives and what they did. And that's not something that I know that you don't take that lightly. I know you, somewhat decently. We've hung out last February, and then the Black Rifle compound back in October, and there in Fredericksburg again for the Nimitz conference. But it's something that you are a great voice piece for these stories, keeping them alive, keeping them going. We haven't really sat around talked much in person, but I've overheard you, when you were there with the families last February, talking with them and, talking with Scott, listen to some of the things that you say. Like you've done the work. I mean, you put in the time, and you've honored like these men and their legacy. And that's something that I think that we respect and hold very, very highly around here. If Neil wasn't UA, I know he'd be giving us, man. Yeah, for sure. His seal of approval on what I just said. So
I appreciate that, man.
We appreciate you. We appreciate everything you've done. And, through your book, which we'll have the links and everything, and, everything we've talked about, we always put the links in the description, people to check out. If there was, if the guys from Fox Company are sitting here right now, they're all here with us, we're doing a reunion, and there was one thing that from their story, from their life experiences, that they could ask of all of us, what would it be?
I think the most articulate person that comes to mind on that topic was probably Ralph Leonoff, who talked a lot about that. And he talked about the mission that they had, that they went to war with, and that they got it done. And as long as that's remembered and valued, then their mission was success. And it was at the time, but they'd like it to continue to be a success. And it will be as long as that is understood and remembered. And that includes understanding, I think, more, not just knowing, but understanding their experience, why they did things they did, what their motivations were, what they went through, what they did. Didn't want pity, any of that stuff. Just get it. and don't be ignorant. Is one way of. Now I'm speaking. That's me saying that, not them. But I think at the same time, I'm going to tell on Joe Drodovic from Fox Company. Uh, One of the first reunions, he was, I don't go in for wearing the big red caps, the covers, and all the shiny jackets, and I don't want to attract attention. I don't really like, when guys do that. I said, Joe, and this is 97. Oh, I said it in a letter when I wrote to him. I said, I get that. However, all these documentaries out there in the world and all this kind of stuff, and speaking from my own experience, the world is full of people who want to know where you are and don't know how to find you. And when they do find you, they want to say something. They don't know what it is they want to say or how to say it, but they want to say something to you. And you're just doing them a daggum favor by putting on a cover, or something. And the next reunion, I showed up and he goes, McCloud, and he's wearing a cover. I said, there you go. And we all went out to dinner at a cafeteria, retired World War II guys. So you go to cafeterias and loaded up the cars and we go to cafeteria. We're standing in line. I think it was John Ruggiero, Joe Drodovic, and because they were buddies, we're all standing in the back of the line. And we're talking, and John's carrying on with his stuff as usual. And I'm looking at this young couple that has come in behind them. They don't see him. They're next in line. And I could see these people going, looking around, trying to see what his hat said. And then looking around, And at a pause, finally the fella, he's in his 30s probably, goes, excuse me, are you guys Marines? And he said, yeah, we're all Marines, him too. I said, no, I'm not. They're carrying on. And you were at Iwo Jima? It sure was. And most of these guys were. And I saw the guy pause and they were looking around. And he said, well, thank you. And Drodovic just turned around and looked at me like, okay, wise guy, But I just looked at him and said, there you go. Well done. Because they want to say that to somebody. They want to tell you that, and you should accept it.
And that kind of circles back to what we were talking about when they came home. They didn't wear anything. They didn't, they didn't want the accolades and the recognition and all of those things. They literally, to quote like Tim Gray, they literally saved the world and asked for nothing in return. Absolutely the greatest generation, without question.
Eisenhower, I don't remember his exact words because it's been too long since I've heard him say them, but when he was talking to Cronkite when he went back to Normandy in the 60s, 64, I think. And he talks about this generation and these boys, these folks, not just boys, but and he said not to gain anything for themselves, but just to preserve liberty. They did this. And that's exactly right. There was no gain. We weren't out there conquering territory or anything else. We're just holding things together and stiff arming. And, one of my favorite, I couldn't wait in the book to get to the point at the end when finally the Japanese have surrendered or they're about to officially do it. And we send the first POW missions at Tokyo. Halsey sends them in. And they go to Amura at Tokyo, and that's where Boyington is and a bunch of the others. And photos that you see. But anyway, they go to the camp, and the commandant of the camp says, I think to Stassen, who is out there as a representative, and he says, I have no authority on which to release these prisoners to you. He says, you don't have any authority at all. Do you know how many people died so that he could say that?
Yeah.
These sorry individuals did all of this, started that kind of war. And all the millions of people around the world died, and all the effort it took, etc., to utter those words. But that was it. And I couldn't wait to get there because that's when it's done.
Now that you say that, I feel like I remember you saying that last February too.
Wouldn't doubt
it. I remember that just like you don't have any authority at all.
Yeah, you
Man,
have no authority at all.
need to like clip this, man. Like the weight of that, how many people died so that he could stand there and say that.
Just so he could utter those words. And you look at these people and say, I hope you're proud of yourself that you did all this, and the entire world had to come and suffer for this, and we had to do all this fighting, much less expenditures of everything else, to get over here and wrestle it out of your hands and wring your neck with it and say, you're done.
Yeah.
That's, when you let these fools get started, how tough it is to get it away from them when it's in their first grip. And to me, that's just a beautiful moment at the end of World War II, right there. Finally, you have no authority at all. It's done. And of course, there's more behind that. I mean, that was a MacArthur. He knew they're not going to admit defeat ever. They didn't really lose. The emperor decided to save the world from atomic weapons and all this other stuff. So therefore, and there were reporters who wrote articles from Japan after the war, and I've got some of those articles, and they said, you walk the street, these people don't think they're defeated. So that's why they're saying such things as, you have no authority at all. And the way MacArthur officiated the surrender ceremony, no officialdom for the Japanese at all. No, you're done.
Yeah.
But so anyway, there's a lot behind that, but the suffering that it took and the effort that it took to get to that point is remarkable.
It is. It really is. Well, man, I just feel like that's a great spot right there. Like, I feel like, we just came to the end of the war, nothing left to be said. Like, it's a beautiful place. And, we appreciate you, of course, taking this time on this Saturday morning to come share your experience, your journey, their experience, the Fox Company Marines. And yeah, it's again, we appreciate, people like you and the things that you do. So, thank you for stopping by with us, taking the time today. And, I don't know when we're going to bump into each other next. I don't know what the schedule looks like, but I sure as hell am looking forward to it. I can tell you that.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Appreciate the kudos as well. I guess you'd say it is the banner that must be carried now. So, you got to take it seriously. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So, for everybody who stopped by, we love you guys. We appreciate you. Thank you for being here and spending your time with us as well. Everybody's time is valuable. Hope you have an incredible 2026 and beyond. And until next time, Semper Fi.